Hello. Hello, my friend. Can you hear me?
I don't think that you can hear me though.
I can hear you. I
Oh,
can
you
hear you
can?
really well.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
You
I
can
didn't
hear me,
realize.
yeah?
Yeah, I can hear you great.
Okay,
I didn't
that's
realize that
very
we were
nice.
passing the mic on this one. So
Well, that's very nice because it's kind of 7 a.m. in the morning here, and it's glad we passed this technical difficulty thing, so we can get
yeah,
into the subject directly. So, how are you doing? All is okay?
yes,
Yes. All right. We have a very juicy subject to speak about.
I know. It's not something that I'm not a subject expert on, but I'm glad to debate both sides of it, and we'll see what happens.
All right. That's cool. First of all, let me thank Yazan and his amazing call-out team for this extraordinary platform. It's really nice, amazing job, really. And now, since you have a very controversial subject to speak about, first of all, I believe we need to be familiar with the terminologies of what we're speaking about here, because the subject is very, very broad. We have a dictator, we have an elected Islamist, and we have democracy. So I'll pass the mic for you to start. How about we give it like 5 minutes each to be able to make the most out of it, because this subject actually is like a couple of hours at least. So 5 minutes me, 5 minutes you, 5 minutes me, 5 minutes you. That's the first 20 minutes, and then we shift back in the second part. Is that
Yeah,
fine with you?
I'd prefer to be a little bit more flexible. I'm not sure I'm always going to have 5 minutes worth of material to speak on. So if you
I think, yeah, I don't mind. I think I might have even 10 minutes speaking material, because this is
I
a
don't
very
mind.
juicy. We'll see how it goes. So
As long as we're being courteous, I don't have a problem with you ending up with
all
it
right.
or
All right,
whatever.
that sounds pretty cool. Okay, first of all, I would love to start this debate by emphasizing on the notion of who is a dictator actually. When we say dictator, what is the first thing that comes to mind? What comes to mind is a dictator is a ruler who wields absolute power. He behaves in an authoritarian and tyrannical manner. This is a dictator for me. Now, the second part, we're speaking about an elected Islamist. Who is an elected Islamist? What an elected Islamist is? An elected Islamist is, in fact, a supporter or leader of a political movement. He advocates for implementing laws that are prescribed by Islam to govern the country. All right, and we need to emphasize on the notion that they came to power through legitimate democratic elections.
Sure. And
Okay.
I do want to say something on each of these
Yeah.
definitions.
Sure. You can go ahead.
Okay, well, let's start out with dictator. I know that it has, as you said, a negative connotation as far as tyranny and the like, but that's not actually inherent in the aspect of a dictator. So a dictator can be, benevolent. That's kind of a joke, is, oh, I'll be a benevolent dictator if I'm ever in power. That people like to say, at least over here. But a dictator is simply a centralized decision-making process for political purposes. So that can be really bad, and that can be good. And the key advantage of a dictatorship is that it's a pretty stable form of government. And then I completely agree with what you're saying so far as the definition for elected Islamist. So yeah, keep going.
Yeah, all right. Now, something we need to also define to make it easier for us to continue this debate is what actually is democracy. Okay, democracy, in its broadest sense, means the rule of the majority. Okay,
Right.
It promotes freedom and equality for people, and it grants them power, and that power is exercised by them through a system of representations, usually involving periodically held free elections. And this is the core of the issue here.
So are you discussing Republican democracy, or are you discussing straight?
I'm discussing democracy in general. I mean, democracy, the fundamental core of what democracy is all about. Since we're familiar with definitions of what a dictator is, and I don't think we disagree on that, and I don't think we disagree on the definition of what an elected Islamist is. And I'm not sure if we agree on what democracy is, because democracy means the rule of the majority.
Right. Democracy is something that we could spend a couple minutes on.
the basic definition. Okay, now since we're familiar with the definition, let's ask this question one more time. The topic of the debate is it better to have a democratically elected Islamist or a dictator? But my question to you will be, it's better for who? Is it better for the people? Is it better for the region? Is it better for progress and economic prosperity? Or is it better for the United States and other governments and other allies? So I'll pass the mic from here.
Yeah, well, first of all, we need to consider with democracy that it is essentially mob rule, and that is not very stable. I mean, you can look at the United States as an example. Every 4 years or every 8 years, with the executive branch of our government, that flip-flops our process all over the place. And what we've seen from that thus far, and historically speaking with other largely democratic societies, is that it doesn't lead to stability, and actually the country ends up breaking apart and falling apart. But as far as comparing that with a dictatorship, the distinction isn't just stability versus non-stability, but it's about how the people in that region, in that country, in that nation, how they fare under one or the other. So I think that we should be focused on what the results are for the people in that area, both in that nation, but then also in the region. Because, you know, if the United States, for example, and we'll call the United States for the purposes of this debate a democracy, if the United States, you know, because it's so unstable, it collapsed overnight and there was infighting or a civil war or something, that would have a huge effect across the entire planet, not just regionally, you know, like North America.
If the United States is a superpower, even if the United States was a dictatorship,
right,
and this is going to have huge implications as well.
I don't think that, you know, for example, in Iraq, that would have as great an impact on the global scale, but it would certainly have a significant impact in the region. So, I was using the United States as an illustration there.
No, we should be using the United States as an illustration. You know, it's as the role model here. Okay, look, the word dictatorship is actually the antonym of democracy. We can't argue about that. You know, it is the antonym. Okay, I'll explain my notion. Why do I think that? Actually, dictatorship defies the fundamental core of what democracy is all about. You know, dictators, mostly, I mean, if you look at the broader picture, they're interested in their own welfare before the interest of their country, and in most of the cases they are ruthless and they're greedy and they rule with an iron fist. You know, they center freedoms and they do not hesitate to use force to intimidate, silence, and even eliminate any form of opposition or resistance. And it gets even worse and worse when we're dealing with an ideological dictator. You know, you have Nazism, fascism, are just few examples of natural devastating outcomes of it.
I don't know if maybe we have a slight delay on the connection here, I think, because we're starting to talk over each other. But we are also the dictator in our debate topic, we don't know the ideology. We can say that they are ideological, but the democratically Islamist is specifically ideological. And the problem is that whether it's under a dictatorship or in a democracy, the minority sect of Muslims in that nation tend to be oppressed by whoever is in power, whether that's the democratically elected Islamist, or whether it's the dictator who is of a different who is in a different sect than a portion of the population. So I think that either of them can have that particular flaw.
Yeah, all right. I wouldn't disagree with you on that notion, but the thing is, the fact of the matter is, the fabric of the society in Muslim countries is actually predominantly conservative. All right, we don't live. This is a fact. Okay, this is a part of the world that is, actually it's in its very early stages of experimenting liberal democracy. And let's not forget that this region was ruled by dictators and monarchs for a very long period of time. Not to mention the severe repercussions of Western imperialist colonialism. This is why people do hate dictators.
The culture into the culture of the area.
Yeah, this is what I'm speaking
there are
about.
traditions of honor and just lifestyle that are very, very strongly tied to the idea of centralized authority. And so what I'm saying is that culturally, democracy isn't necessarily as good a fit in these regions as is dictatorship. Now, that doesn't mean that can't change. It's just a question of which actually fits in with the culture as it is right now.
Yeah, okay, that makes so much sense. But the thing is, allowing those citizens to have a space for their views and to let them engage and experience in a democratic process through trial and error is more important to having a functional and stable state than to have a dictator which suppresses the people and which is like a one-man rule, and they don't give them any sorts of freedom or any sort of evolution, because they need to evolve some way or another. If dictatorial, look, the Middle East is being governed by dictators for more than 60 to 70 years now, and what is the result? What do you see in the Middle East is a total mess. This needs to change.
That's because of the United States stepping in. So I first of all, I want to clarify,
that's one part of the thing.
United States interventions that have been going on over there, but the region has, outside of American interventions, has been very stable, and how that greatly affects is the poorest people in the region. That when there's not stability, that's affecting things like food supply and water supply, and just the flow of goods and services can be hugely disrupted, and it disproportionately affects the poor in those regions, which is why you want stability, because in America we are all essentially rich on the global scale. We are all in the upper 20% or better of income. It might even be 10%. I forget that statistic. So when we have Trump come in after having Barack Obama, we're all used to doing our business day to day. We are a very business focused nation. But when you're over in the Middle East or in North Africa, what have you, that there is not as strong economic prosperity there to give you that buffer for when changes come, and that again is going to disproportionately affect the very poor.
All right, but I'll come to counter this argument with the fact that if it's not just about economics, okay? I know economics is the driving force of all, but it's not just about economics.
I'm not talking about dollars and cents. I'm talking about if you can't afford food and water because the leadership changed and now you're in the minority, that's a big problem. I'm talking about the stability as far as real goods and services that are needed.
You make it seem like it is impossible to achieve economic stability under an elected Islamist. If you look at if I could provide you with a live example here, the AKP party, the Turkish example. They were a secularist nation, okay, and then the AKP party of Erdogan came to power, and it's a very solid example of a successful experience in scoring political victories and economic prosperity. Despite some practices, so how you might call it,
and that can be the result, but it is more likely to stay stable under a dictator. That is what I'm saying. Except for the United States stepping in where it shouldn't belong. For the most part, while there has been, human rights violations, people have been oppressed, stability has been a lot better overall.
Well, I'll come back to the Turkish example again. You need to take into account that the AKP had been elected into democratic elections and held power in Turkey since it gained parliamentary majority in 2002. It's been 15 years now. Okay, with that being said, Erdogan's remains supported by the majority of the electorate. He faces relatively powerful opposition in and out of the parliament. If you take this into consideration, this is a successful attempt at Islamists taking control, because
you have to balance that example against historically. There have been many stable dictatorships in the same region. So you're holding up this one example, and that one example is great. I celebrate that example, but you can't
should
say that
all.
that then will apply across the board.
No, no, I'm not generalizing. I'm not painting everyone with the same brush. I'm saying that the reason that we had revolutions all over the Middle East, of course, one part is American interference. The other
Yes.
part, okay, the other part is people were really fed up with this type of the government that was here. We really want to change. We really hope for democratic values and democratic ambitions. But on the ground, we were faced again with dictators. I mean, the power grip is so strong that they won't just let it go like that. So the thing, people really want change. They don't care if the ruler is Islamist or secular or whatever. They just don't want a ruler to stay here for 30 years. We need change. We need to be engaged.
So,
What do you
what do you mean by change? So, we've been discussing stability, but are you referring to change as far as are you specifically considering human rights, or what is the category of change that you're thinking of?
Well, all the benefits that come with democracy. This is the. I know it won't come overnight, but it's a slow, gradual process. But it should be taken into account. Why it should be taken into account? Because this is the natural evolution of the system that we're living in at the moment. We can't stay under an oppressive regime for eternity. An action had to be taken. An action was taken in 2011 when we revolted against the corrupt 30-year rule of Hosni Mubarak that was here. And then we were so hopeful, but nothing happened eventually. We were suppressed back. And a very good example of that, in Tunisia. In Tunisia, following the overthrow of the dictatorial regime of Ben Ali that took power for 3 decades or more, an Islamist party took over, and now the government, they faced major inherited economic and political problems, and popular discontent grew, and this is normal. But the thing is, people, they weren't satisfied, but instead of using force to remain in power, we held another elections in 2015, and a secular government came to power. So the thing is,
right. So the thing is, you're describing something that has, at least from your perspective, had overall positive results, and that is great. But that isn't, the dictatorships aren't inherently worse than that. While you can point to specific dictatorships and say, under this one you had this terrible thing happen, under this one you had this terrible thing happen, overall we have to consider the whole package. And so when you look at that, you have to realize that we're destabilizing the region. It's a poor region, and that is disproportionately hurting people who are in poverty there. And then you have to consider that democratically elected Islamists are just as capable of persecuting minorities as our dictators. And so just on those two fronts,
the idea of being able to elect leaders in itself is fundamental to people. Okay, now let's say we elected an Islamically elected Islamist. Now after 4 years, the guy, if he's good, he's gonna continue. If he's not good, then we're gonna topple him out in elections. This is not the case with a dictator. You can't have that with a dictator. You have him for eternity until he just either by a revolution, or either by an overthrow of the government, or either by a political assassination, or either by an interference when he's not longer a useful card.
And do you mind if I just take the last minute, since we're just about over for the first round?
Yeah,
okay.
I would love to have 10 seconds of the last minute.
Okay, so the thing is that a dictator doesn't rule alone. While there is centralized decision making, if he's making bad decisions that undermine the economic and social and otherwise the stability and prosperity of the nation, he's not, physically the one actually going out and doing all the things. There are lots and lots and lots of people underneath of him that have to be working hard at doing exactly what he's saying. And if what he's saying isn't working, they have the ability to have a coup. And that has happened hundreds of times in all places across the world, whether or not it's a dictatorship. And so that's democracies aren't the only ones that have the ability to overturn. If there is truly somebody bad in place, then the underlings are able to take over. Okay, so we're switching. I got to say, I'm all for democracy now. So.
Yeah.
All right.
I could tell that.
How about,
I just wanted to say a little phrase, whether it is related to democracy or whether it is related to dictatorship or whatever. It's all a game of power, and the inherent flaw with dictatorship or autocracy in general is that it grants absolute power. And as Lord Atkin said, absolute power corrupts absolutely.
well,
even if it's a democracy.
There.
Yeah, I get that.
All right, but we do have to discuss whether or not it's better to have a dictator versus having a democratically elected Islamist. And overall, the results that we've seen with democracy, even though the implementation was very messy, such as in Iraq, or revolution, where in any of the other locations, while the implementation may have been messy, the results have been that people are more free, they are more equal, and overall they are receiving better education and lifestyle than they were able to achieve before, especially if they are a minority in the region. Yeah, for sure. Can you counter that? Go for it.
I can counter. Okay. Okay. I think it would be counterproductive to use a broad brush and paint our conversation with this. All right. First of all, we need to acknowledge, all right, that we don't live in an ideal world. I think you can agree with me on that. And it's not rainbows and butterflies, and it's not black or white either. Most probably it's shades of gray, I think.
Right, and we're discussing on that shade of gray scale whether it's better to have democratic or dictatorship. Go for it.
Okay, well, look, we can argue all sorts of labels, from nationalism to monarchy to dictatorships to communism to capitalism to socialism, feudalism, you name it, all right? No matter what the competing political ideology is, and I will have to agree with you on that economics is the main driving force behind the general population satisfactory meter. Okay, it is a materialistic world we live in. The equation is really simple. Economic stability, economic stability and prosperity equals satisfaction equals. It doesn't really matter what type of government.
That's not purely true, because for example, the United States had an extremely good economic situation back in the 18th century. But we still chose independence from England over the human rights violations that were going on. We weren't starving. We weren't having huge economic problems, but we still chose, because of the desire for freedom and the desire for human rights, to declare independence from a monarchy and move into a democratic republic.
That was a revolution era. The same thing we had a couple of years ago. So because it's a war for independence. Do you know what I mean? To an extent, dictatorships they're more of an economic institution, if you would like to call it. Elections and democracy can be considered a bonus or a luxury for
the economic aspect so strongly that the dictatorship is better. And I was countering with the example that is known all over the world of the American War for Independence, which wasn't based on economic reasons. I mean,
well,
there were taxes that they opposed, but people weren't starving, and overall we weren't poor compared to other parts of the world.
One part is that America is not the whole world. America is just one part of the world.
No, sure. I'm just using it as the obvious example.
yeah, and the thing is, elections and democracy can be considered a bonus or a luxury for developed countries. All right, dictatorial regimes, they can better, they can be a better path for countries that to move on civil wars and focus on development. The countries that are still developing, I believe it's better to have a dictatorial regime than to have a dictatorship rule them.
Well, the problem is that the dictatorship is specifically aimed at suppressing the development. So while they want to concentrate wealth at the top of that dictatorship, they want to have themselves and their buddies and their army and police forces well paid. The common people, they are being actively suppressed to prevent to prevent uprisings, to prevent civil unrest, and the end result is that overall the satisfaction is lower, but people are scared to step up, and so that stability is an artificial result of fear and oppression.
Okay, having authority and power centralized and wielded by one person or one party to achieve one long-term vision, it can create economic wonders. They can simply focus on their goal without, opposition and without constant change in the management, as what happened in the United States. Obama putting rules and then Trump putting another rules. If this happened in a developing country, the results are going to be somehow catastrophic. The reason I believe that, in fact, democratic regimes periodically change. They keep changing. No one can see their policies being enforced and they reach fruition if the successors, decided to pave a different path. And very good examples of that. I could give you a very good example of a very good dictatorship that helped create economic wonder. President.
Well, again, economic prosperity is not the only metric, and we've already discussed.
Yeah, it's not just the only metric, but the thing is, if you are a developing country, for example, President Park Chung-hee of South Korea, he had a vision for his country. He was an uncorrupted nationalist dictator that can be credited for laying the foundation of South Korea's miraculous economic boom. South Korea now is number 11 worldwide, and
South Korea is a democracy. That's why it's at the economic prosperity that it has, is because the people moved on past that.
I'm talking about who laid the foundation for South Korea to have the economic boom that it had now. It's not just because it is a democracy. It's because the guy did rule the country and he had a vision and he moved towards that vision uninterrupted. Another good example.
It wasn't uninterrupted though. The United States intervened and helped to establish the democracy there.
Lee Kuan Yew, he was a dictator that held power as a prime minister for more than 31 years. He ruled with an iron grip. He censored freedoms. He often targeted political opponents in courts. But he transformed Singapore from a small port city into a wealthy global hub. And look at Singaporeans now. I mean, people can have the fruits of that in a while. It shouldn't be like right now. Okay, my kids are going to have the fruits of that. His kids are going to have the fruits of that. Countries are not built in a day. Countries are built in years. It maybe take decades. The thing is, you need to focus on a long-term vision. I don't think
it's easy to counter that example with the rise of countries such as the United States or Canada or Europe, most of Europe, and then countering that. Compared to regions of the world that have had the dictators in place for a long time, the economic prosperity, while it might be stable, has not been this huge boom overall. You're citing the one narrow cherry-picked example of Singapore, where they are heavily influenced by the heavyweight of China's interaction and influencing the prosperity of the region.
China is not a democracy.
So, but overall, dictatorships suppress that economic prosperity comparatively to democratic.
Well, we can have a look at United Arab Emirates, for example. It's a monarchy. There is no political freedoms over there. It's a dictatorial rule. They might not enjoy economic freedoms or democratic values.
Well, the people at the top are rich, and the people at the bottom are not. They might be better off than other people in the Middle East who don't have the vast oil resources that they have.
Actually, the United Emirates
are still very poor.
United Arab Emirates is not an oil-rich country. I was in Dubai 20 years ago. It's not an oil-rich country. You're mistaking United Arab Emirates with Saudi Arabia. I was there 20 years ago. I recall it was mostly deserts. Now look at it. It became a global business and touristic haven. And the rule there is an authoritarian rule. It's a monarchy. It's not dictator. It's not a democracy. So it's not that bad after all, if you think about it.
I think I misheard something. Can you say that again?
No, I said I was in Dubai 20 years ago, and I recall it was mostly desert just 20 years ago. Look at it now. It became a global business and touristic haven, and the ruling party is there. It's not at all democratic.
Right,
it's a monarchy.
but that's been as a result of a move toward freedom, which is the essence of democracy.
Yeah, but it's not a democratic regime. That's what I'm speaking about. It's mainly a dictatorship.
And again, those are being influenced by big traders in the region. But overall, when you look at Europe and the United States, when you're looking at Western civilization, which tends toward democracy, versus the rest of the world, which has tended toward dictatorships and the like, the economic results speak for themselves. And so you can have these examples here and there where you had a benevolent dictator where it worked out great, but that is not overall the result, or that is not the typical result.
Okay, I mentioned earlier in the first debate, the Muslim world, it's a very volatile region. You can't, and especially the Middle East, it's very volatile. And if you're trying to enforce democracy there with an Islamic flavor, it does sound indeed very tempting, but the reality on the ground is a different scenario. Democracy needs time to evolve in that region, and trying to enforce it will be counterproductive. And we've seen examples.
Well, who said anything about enforcing it?
No, because
I'm not in favor of the United States stepping in and imposing it. But when you look at the end result, you're talking about the messiness of implementing it. But once it is implemented, the results have been growing into something that is better than what was there before.
Yeah, all right.
And Iraq has hardly been there for any time at all.
No, Iraq is a special condition. It was 100 times better under a dictatorship than it is under a democracy now, and I think we could see the fruition of that. Democracy didn't just land in the United States with a parachute. It took decades upon decades of violence, blood revolution, ferocious war, slavery, genocide, and a lot of other horrible atrocities. It was the closest journey they had. A lot of flaws in the baby steps forward was the evolution of modern democracy as we see it today. It didn't just happen overnight.
But the tipping point was the United States intervention, and while I disagreed with that, what we have seen afterward is that the results have been growing into something better. And again, Iraq has been a democracy for less than 10 years. We haven't seen the full-blown glory, if you will, of the changes that have taken place. And again, the implementation was horrible. Hundreds of thousands of people died for that. I think it's a tragedy. But when we are discussing whether democratically elected Islamists are better than a dictator, I believe that the results are already speaking for themselves, and we do still need some more time to see it grow into its potential.
No, but I don't think in this particular case that Iraq is a complete disaster. Look at it. If you think there's a government, there is no government. Look at ISIS now. Look at
still tied into the implementation, though, and it's been less than 10 years, and the United States is still heavily involved.
Yeah, that's the thing. Actually, I tend to think of Iraq as a colony instead of an independent state. It is.
So if it's a colony with democratically elected Islamists for leaders, that doesn't have to do with whether or not it's an independent state. We're discussing the benefits of democratically elected Islamists rather than a dictator. We're not discussing whether or not it's basically under the thumb of the United States, which I concur that it largely still is.
No, well, look, I would love to emphasize on something here. I didn't just read about dictators or democratic Islamists from a library book or from news cables, all right? And it was not just a non-fiction story that I came across while surfing the internet. I had a real life experience. I lived through, I participated in, and I witnessed not one revolution, but two revolutions, okay? I didn't just know about what life under a dictator is or what life under an Islamist is. I actually witnessed the whole process firsthand and was a part of the transition. You know, in 2011, Hosni Mubarak
Right.
ruled the country for more than
And
30
You're
years.
too
All right.
close to that transition time in the timeline to see the results from on the other side. You're seeing the initial results, and they might not be as good as what you remember from before. But the growing into the fruition is going to start to look a lot more like what the more developed democracies of Europe and the United States and the like. It's going to grow into something more like that.
Yeah, and how long is that going to take? Because look,
Well, for us, it took
it took
only
hundreds.
about half a century.
Yeah, and do you think we're ready for a half a century now? If we're still at least not we don't the people are not yet ready for it. You can't just enforce it, and you can't just say this it's my way or the highway. No, that's not true. You don't get to do that.
First of all, I understand what you're saying there, but I'm trying to understand why you're saying that, because and again, I recognize that the United States is involved there, but separately, we're discussing whether or not it is better to have democratically elected Islamists than a dictator, and whether or not the people are ready for that. My argument has been that they are still growing into that. It's still messy, it's still transitional, but that the results will be better, and maybe they've been pushed further than they were ready for. But again, they're still growing into that, and the results in other parts of the world have indicated that that's going to work out great in the long term.
My buddy, you say that based on assumptions, okay? I'm telling you that based on a personal experience. I'm telling you that because in 2011, Mubarak ruled the country for more than 30 years.
But you can't discuss your personal experience is that much of history.
I understand.
History, we see what the results actually are.
I totally understand, but I want to make it clear that that revolution. The main topic of the subject is that is an Islamist, a politically elected Islamist, better than a dictator or not? We had the politically elected Islamists in office, and I tell you for sure he was not, because his loyalties, they were unexperienced. They still need time to evolve. There is no political activity here. People are not politically aware here. They still need time to evolve, and that time is going to be costly for the country. We need to be economically stable first. We need to be secured first. We need to push the American intervention first. We need to be stable, and then we can speak about democracy, and then we can speak about implementing laws and choosing people. But in this condition we have in the Middle East, it's very volatile, and I think introducing democracy now, or even enforcing it, will be counterproductive to
right,
the dictators that already rule the place right now.
You're again focusing on the implementation, and I can agree with you that might not be the best way to implement. Okay, as a matter of fact, I'll just straight up say it. Organically growing into a democracy is superior to having it thrust upon you. But again, you're looking at this much history compared to this much. All over the world, wherever the people have become more free, wherever they have had greater participation in their governments, that has grown into the economic prosperity and the the civil rights development that we consider the Western countries to be successful as a result of.
You could have the Chinese example.
Yeah. Do you mind if we step out of the debate after your last statement, and we'll use our we'll take 30 seconds each or something?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say if we look at the Chinese example is totally different from that. They don't have a democratic country. They don't run a democratic election. They're communist, and they have shown a very successful model of running the country. They became a superpower. They became financially independent, and they're very competitive in a lot of stages and on the world arena. So what I want to say is that at this particular period of time, a dictatorship is better for the region than an elected Islamist. It might be on the very long term that the elected Islamist is better, but not for now. Not for this. Not for this.
Okay. And
But
even then, for my last couple of seconds, I'll just say, even then, you would have to reinstall a dictator, which would probably end up with similar results to installing a democracy. Just as a thought. But it's been a great debate, and thank you again to Yaz. And